I know we read the first couple of verses yesterday. We'll go ahead and read the entirety of the chapter, including the first couple of verses, just because it helps make it feel more complete, if you will. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. So to sum up the first day, it simply is the only creation that we would see would be light itself, and that he calls the light day and the darkness night. This is one of the very few times we'll see it happens a couple of times here, but it's not a common thing where God names things. And the interesting thing here is that depending on how you take it chronologically, if this is a reference back to the beginning, then you could very easily say that God saying, "Let there be light," as his first act of creation in the universe, which I do think it is. I think this harkens back to verse 1. I think that this is what we would call the Big Bang, right? That "Let there be light" is the moment that the universe sprang into existence. And another thing that is interesting about this is that it says he separated the light from the darkness. Now, this is an interesting factoid. If you know anything about cosmology, I'm sure most of my audience is already well aware of this, but it does bear repeating. Is that when we look at what little we know of the Big Bang, and most of honestly what we know directly from the Big Bang, because we can't observe all the way back to it, but we can get close to it thanks to our recent discoveries in the microwave cosmic background radiation. And when we look at it, the reason that matter can even exist, at least matter in large masses like galaxies and stars, the reason it's not just like perfectly distributed is because there was a form of irregularity within the Big Bang itself. At least that's kind of if you look at the imagery of the cosmic background radiation, it's clear there are areas of intensity and areas of relatively nothing. And so you could interpret that as basically, if God's hand was in the moment of creation, the fact that we have this seemingly random pattern of distribution could be God's hand on things to make sure that things get separated out so that the matter that is necessary to eventually create us can exist. It would seem logical that if the initial creation of the universe was in fact sparked by a truly unthinking natural event, that the distribution of energy in the initial Big Bang would be fairly uniform. There doesn't appear to be any compelling reason that it needs to be distributed as randomly as it apparently is. And I find that very interesting. All right, moving on. And God said, "Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water." So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it. And it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. All right. This is an interesting one because day 2 here, creation of the sky, basically the atmosphere, if you will. And there are two conflicting interpretations that are one of which is very popular to talk about among atheist crowds as well as young Earth creationists, which is the idea that if we and people like Kent Hovind and those types of young Earth creationists will say this, that this is literally describing that there was water on the surface of the earth, and then God put a second layer of water above the atmosphere. Now, and then so the atmosphere was almost like a cushion between an ocean floating up in the sky and the ocean on Earth. Now, it doesn't, the thing about it is that that would seem to violate the laws of physics for that to even be able to work. And I don't think it makes a lot of sense, even within the interpretation. Yes, you could kind of get that out of the wording here, but the thing that they forget to do is realize that, okay, people like Moses and stuff, we're not idiots. They know that when you look up in the sky, there's not an ocean up there. Now, some people would say, "Oh, well, the sky is blue, therefore they thought it was water up there because of their simple primitive minds." But the fact is that that was not at any point a common belief. However, what does make sense, because this is something that was known for a long time, although not, I don't know that it was really, I'd have to do some research. I should have, but I haven't. I don't know if this was something that was considered known at the time that Moses would have written this. But I think when it talks about separating the water beneath the vault from the water above the vault, I think he's talking about the clouds. Because clouds are, in fact, made of water. And so I don't think there's a levitating ocean around the earth. I think that this is simply describing the creation of the sky, for the most part, as we understand the sky. So lots of clouds, and in fact, in all probability, more clouds than we would have today, because we're talking about a more primordial earth. But I think it makes sense, and we have to understand that yes, the Bible is the Word of God, but it also exists in the real world. And so if the Bible says that the sky is green and we look up and we see the sky is blue, we need to try and figure out, okay, did we mistranslate a word, or is it trying to give a message not about the actual color of the sky, but some other message about it? In this particular case, I don't think it needs any serious mental gymnastics to understand that there is, in fact, water in the sky. And I mean, that's where rain comes from, so it's like it's not that hard to figure out. All right, moving on to the third day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God calls the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he calls seas. And God saw that it was good. So here, obviously, we have the creation of the continents. Whether it was a supercontinent, like geologists tend to theorize happened, millions or billions, I guess, of years ago, versus something more similar to what we have today, is irrelevant. I tend to think that, hey, if the Earth is 4 billion years old, there's no reason. I mean, and the interesting thing is, I think that this actually does describe the supercontinent. Was it Pangea? Because it says that God called the water under the sky to be gathered to one place, as opposed to several places like we see as the oceans are divided between various land masses. However, if there's only a singular land mass, you could argue that there's only one ocean. So I think that it's interesting that, in a way, I think this fairly accurately describes what we currently believe is the early Earth. I would also point out that I'm not saying that it is absolute, like you have to take it as absolute biblical truth that this is describing Pangea. It's just that I think it's interesting that it does happen to line up, and I don't see a conflict between this and Pangea. Then God said, so we're continuing on. Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed on it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. Land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit in seed according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. So, on the third day, God did two major things: created the landmass and created vegetation. And I think that this is interesting because this is kind of the transition from the first bracket of events to the second, is the creation of vegetation. And I don't think there's too many people that would argue that animals came before plants for the most part. So, as far as chronologically, it's not a problem. And as far as the way that the story is being told, everything is being set up for the next thing. It's a logical sequence of events. And I also think, and this will you'll see in just a moment, because there are other descriptions we're going to get into in the last 3 days here. But notice the way that it describes the vegetation. Where does the vegetation come from? Does God literally plant seeds in the ground? No. It says, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees of their land to bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. So it seems to me that God set up some kind of process, put down some kind of basic biomatter, if you will, and then let evolution do its job. And so it does, I don't think that God had to sit there and go, okay, so let's make a rose and a daffodil and all. I think that this could very, very easily describe just putting some very basic, like algae type plant life on the planet and then letting it go from there. Right, so now we're getting into, now that we kind of set the stage, we're getting into some of the placement of things. And God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate day from night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on earth. And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser night to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light on earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. So this is the one that many atheists like to lord over Christians with, saying, see, your Bible is anti-science. Because how in the world could God have created the sun and the moon and the stars on day 4 when the sun is what, the sunrise and sunset is what denotes a day? And even every day it says there was evening and there was morning. How could you have evening and morning if there's no sun? How could you have plants on the earth without any sun? And the simple answer is, well, you couldn't. And that's why I think that we're talking about something that is presented in logical order as opposed to chronological order, which, of course, we talked about in detail yesterday. But what we're looking at here is that the first 3 days was God basically showing the environment that he was setting up. And then the second 3 days is God showing the things that he put into that environment, actually starting with the second half of the third day when he laid down vegetation. But and then so now we're getting into the stuff that that God placed in on the earth, and culminating, of course, with humanity. So this is where it gets really interesting. So on the fifth day, God said, "Let the water teem with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living thing in which water teems and moves about in it according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. So here we get our sea creatures and avians. And again, it does not seem to me that it's that God put every species of fish, every species of bird down. Rather, he put some basic stuff and then let evolution do its job. And we'll get more of that, especially when we get into Genesis chapter 2. But the if we look at this part of it, again, God is setting things up because we need plants, we need fish, we need birds. What are these things going to be for? Well, they're going to end up being, he's setting up the entire food chain, basically. And then we get to the climax, if you will, of the creation week. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds, and God saw that it was good. Now, again, then this is, I think, an interesting thing, because this is similar to what we saw from the plants. Is that he's saying, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds. Not, okay, I'm going to hammer together a giraffe and then a cow, and then, he's basically showing there is a process in place for this. And, with the living creatures in the water and the air, God blesses them and says, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the water and the sea." So that, I think, is the beginning of evolution for those creatures. However, then the sixth day continues and says, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." And then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And all the beasts of the earth, and the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life to it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. So it culminates with the creation of man. And while Genesis 1 does not describe this the same way as Genesis 2 does, here's the interesting thing. So we saw that the land produced living creatures. The land produced the vegetation. The sea produced the fish, right? So, and this is just a talk. If we look at the way that this is written, it seems very clear that we're talking about a natural process is producing these things. And while it says, let us make mankind in our own image, and it doesn't say how he does it, he does say how he does it in chapter 2, which is that Adam is formed from the dust of the ground. And so, the same way as every other living creature. So is that an indication that man is an evolved creature? It's entirely possible. I'm not saying it is or it isn't as a definitive, but I'm saying that I don't see a conflict. If it happens to turn out that evolution is true, then the Bible accounts for it. If it turns out that evolution is not true, the Bible accounts for that as well, because this is not attempting to be a scientific textbook. I do think what's more important here than the actual process is that in verse 26, we get our first indication that God, while not a polytheistic being, it has a multiple persons in one being, what we generally describe as the Trinity. And that is because God says, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea, etc. If if God, if there's not a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, why would God say, let us make man in our image? It would seem more likely that God would say, I will make man in my image. And I think that that's a very interesting choice of words. And I do think that it points towards the triune concept of God. Also, notice that it does. Why this is the quick version of human creation. So it simply says male and female. He created them. We'll get more detail in chapter 2, but there are varying schools of thought on how chapter 2 fits within the narrative of chapter 1, and we'll get into that on tomorrow's live stream. But for right now, keep in mind that so when we talk, there are scientific terms that are included in here before those scientific terms truly existed in the contemporary way. So, for example, we talk, and it's funny because Virginia's actually already kind of hinting at where I'm going with this. When we talk about evolution, we generally talk about speciation. And what speciation is the idea that, okay, if you have a dog, right, and this dog, right, come here, Pringle, come here. Okay, so we got this little dog here, right, and we got a male and a female dog, and they start having lots and lots of puppies, right, and then some of their puppies move in to another valley on the other side of the mountain. And they start having puppies over there, while the dogs on this side of the mountain are having puppies over here. And it happens to be a little bit colder on the other side of the mountain. And so dogs that are born with a thicker fur coat have a better chance at survival. And since they have a better chance at survival, they have a better chance of reproducing. And over the course of hundreds of generations, then or even thousands or millions of generations, depending on the creature, the longer or thicker coat becomes more common on dogs on the other side of the mountain than on dogs on this side of the mountain. Likewise, if a group breaks off of that, moves to another area where the terrain or where the food supply requires the dogs to be larger to be able to hunt, they'll probably grow to be larger. In the same way, dogs that are born with a little bit of extra size will have a better chance of reproducing, and that's how these adaptations continue. Well, over the course of time, if these groups remain in isolation from each other, eventually dogs in the first group will no longer be able to produce puppies with dogs from the second group because they've just changed too much. They are no longer genetically compatible. And likewise, dogs from the first and second group would no longer be able to reproduce with dogs of the third group. So now you have 3 distinct species of dog that evolved over time because of their isolation. And that's a very common way that speciation happens. If you Darwin's whole work on the Galapagos Islands is all about that the finches adapted to their particular environment on each island. So here what now when I talk about speciesation, I think that what we're seeing is that that is actually mentioned in the Bible here. It's just that the word species did not exist at the time that the Bible was first translated. And so instead, we get the term kind. We see that a lot. They will reproduce after their own kind. And we see that for, if we go back to uh, day 3, that tree bearing fruit with seed in it and according to its kinds, the land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds. And then again on day 5, where it says that the fish and the winged creatures reproduced after their own kinds, and again on day 6 with the animals that they would produce after their own kinds. The only group that it doesn't say that about is humans. However, that's probably because this is one of the earliest, I think, speculations that animals evolve, but humans do not. That there is something different about humans here, because it does not say. At least let me double check here, but let's re-look at this. So, we'll make mankind in our own likeness. He has dominion over everything. God created them. Bless them, said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish and the sea and the birds and over every living thing that moves on the ground. As opposed to when he said, this is to the fish and the birds, God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the water, the seas, and the birds increase on the earth. But this was just after it describes that they reproduce after their own kind. So I do think that there's a reason for that, and that is that all humans are the same species. There is only one human race, right? And so regardless of if you are white, black, Asian, Hispanic, or whatever, that is not. You're still, you're all human. There's not multiple species of humans, even though groups of humans have been isolated from other groups of humans throughout human history. There are tribes that still exist to this day, like particularly the one off the coast of India, that still has never had, except for a few isolated incidents that broke the law, didn't have contact with the outside world. And yet, they're still human, with all the faculties that every other human has in common. Sure, some groups tend to have darker skin to protect them against the sun. Some groups tend to have more hair to protect them from the cold, etc. But we're still all human. And Darren, I'm not sure if it might be Sentinel Island. I'm not 100% sure. So I think that the beauty of Genesis is that while it is not a scientific textbook, I also do not see a lot of inherent conflict between science and Genesis. I also find it interesting that in some ways, Genesis seems to actually predict some stuff that science took hundreds, or in a couple of cases, thousands of years to catch up with. Like the very first verse of the Bible, that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And it wasn't until the 20th century that science actually caught up to that they realized that the universe did have a definitive beginning. And ever since then, atheistic scientists have been trying desperately to come up with a way to counter that. And might I say, without as much luck as they would like. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for the reading today. A lot shorter than yesterday, but then yesterday we had a lot of ground to cover with the different interpretations of Genesis 1. And tomorrow we'll probably not get deep into Genesis 2 because I got some stuff likewise to cover with that. Testify the power of God. I will tell the world of the hope I have found. Oh,
good to keep to myself, so I will testify of the power of God. Oh, let's do that right